program is the Active Center. It's created by David Sappe.
Pronounced Seppi.
Pronounced Seppi.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a literal game changer in the digital age. We're looking at the historic landmark settlement against Meta over youth social media addiction. Look, if you've ever wondered how much your attention is actually worth, or, how these platforms specifically design their apps to keep you endlessly scrolling, well, the details of this legal battle are about to make it crystal clear. So let's just dive right in. $18 billion. I mean, let that number just sink in for a second. That is the staggering total framework value of the settlement. And this wasn't just a handful of angry users either. This massive action was driven by a huge bipartisan coalition of over 50 U.S. states, territories, and the District of Columbia. It represents a totally unprecedented, unified pushback against the way social media operates for younger users. Now, what makes this settlement so fascinating is how that massive payout is actually sliced up. Right off the bat, it's really important to note that Meta officially denied all wrongdoing here. They framed this settlement instead as a collaborative path forward to help empower parents. But regardless, the financial commitment is absolutely undeniable. The funds are basically split in two. You've got a guaranteed base payout of $12.7 billion, and that's spread out over 10 years. And then there's this really unique contingency provision for another $5.3 billion. We're going to dig into exactly what triggers that second huge payout a little later, but spoiler alert, it is a brilliant piece of legal strategy. All right, so here is our roadmap for this explainer today. 1. Engineering digital addiction. 2. The social coercion factor. 3. Sweeping platform reforms. And 4. Impact on the industry.
Let's start with part 1. Engineering digital addiction.
So what exactly triggered this lawsuit? Well, the plaintiff's main allegation was that Meta prioritized profit and engagement over user safety through very deliberate addictive design choices. The lawsuits essentially argued that social media platforms aren't just neutral digital spaces. They're actually engineered using highly specific psychological mechanics. First up, you have intermittent variable rewards. Think about how you check your phone for likes or comments. It literally mimics the unpredictable payouts of a slot machine, right? It releases dopamine and keeps you coming back to pull the lever again. Second is frictionless consumption. These are features like the infinite scroll or auto-playing videos that just remove any natural stopping cues. You never reach the bottom of the page. And third, we have targeted push notifications. These are strategically timed to exploit the fear of missing out, practically dragging teens back into the app late at night or right in the middle of school. Because of all this, courts are increasingly starting to look at these engagement-optimized algorithms not just as free speech, but as potentially defective product design. The crux of the legal argument really hinged on this glaring contradiction. The plaintiffs heavily relied on internal Meta documents and whistleblower testimony to highlight a massive gap between the company's public messaging and its private data. While Meta's public stands often reassured parents that app usage was totally beneficial, or at least benign, their own internal studies were admitting some pretty alarming realities. For example, they found that Instagram exacerbated body image issues for 1 in 3 teen girls. And it was exactly this kind of evidence that really fueled the state's arguments. They claimed the company was fully aware of the mental health risks, but actively chose to downplay them.
Moving on to part 2, the social coercion factor.
Whenever this topic comes up, the elephant in the room is always the exact same question. If these apps are causing so much anxiety and sleep loss, why don't teenagers just log off? Well, when you realize that 80 to 90% of teenagers are active on platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, the answer becomes a lot clearer. Because of these massive networking effects, social media has basically replaced traditional physical spaces for peer interaction. For a teenager today, voluntarily opting out and joining that tiny 15% group of non-users, that often results in severe social isolation. So it's not just a matter of having willpower, it's social coercion. Removing yourself from the platform literally means removing yourself from the social fabric of your friend group. Voluntarily logging off is almost impossible without structural limits in place.
Which brings us to part 3, sweeping platform reforms.
Okay, so if teens can't easily opt out themselves, how exactly is the law stepping in to alter the structure? Well, under these new agreements, a teenager's digital day is about to look radically different. First, there are now mandatory productive pauses. So after 15 minutes of continuous scrolling, the app will actually enforce a built-in break. Second, there's a hard, default 2-hour daily screen time limit across Facebook and Instagram, and that can only be adjusted via parental controls. And third, specifically to tackle that sleep deprivation issue, there's a strict night mode lockout. That means access is blocked entirely from midnight to 6 a.m. But the changes definitely go beyond just the clock. The actual user interface itself is getting a massive overhaul with these new feed safeguards. Teens will now have the option, or importantly, parents can mandate the option, to switch over to a chronological non-algorithmic feed, which completely disables autoplay. The settlement also straight up bans cosmetic digital filters that promote unrealistic physical comparisons. Like counts are going to be hidden by default to help reduce that intense social pressure, and push notifications will automatically be muted during standard school hours. And honestly, perhaps the most important part of all this is that every single change will be verified by a strict 5-year independent auditing program under state supervision. So no loopholes.
Now remember that $5.3 billion contingency payout we mentioned at the very start? Here is where the level playing field clause comes in. The states actually pulled off an incredibly clever legal strategy here. That massive $5.3 billion chunk of change, along with even stricter rules like a 1-hour daily cap, are entirely contingent on Meta's main competitors, specifically TikTok and YouTube, adopting the exact same safety standards. It's basically a genius mechanism designed to force standard, industry-wide compliance across the board, rather than just punishing one single company in a vacuum.
And finally, Part 4, Impact on the Industry.
Look, legally enforced screen time caps don't just change a teenager's evening routine, they fundamentally disrupt the entire business model of the attention economy. Think about it. Social media companies make their money by selling user attention to advertisers. So when you suddenly enforce 2-hour daily usage caps and overnight blocks, the daily supply of youth ad impressions drastically shrinks. But the advertiser demand to reach those kids, that doesn't go away at all. So with a shrinking supply and constant demand, the cost per thousand ad rates, the actual cost for businesses to reach these consumers, will be forced significantly higher. Plus, without those hyper-addictive algorithmic feeds tracking every single move, targeted ads naturally become way less efficient.
So, the crucial point here is how we define the word cost moving forward. Yes, the financial acquisition costs for businesses are definitely going to rise. Social media startups are going to face much higher barriers to entry because of all these new compliance and age verification costs. However, as this explainer of the settlement data clearly shows, the non-monetary costs, the heavy toll measured in psychological harm, sleep deprivation, and mental health expenses that were previously just absorbed by teenagers and their parents, those costs are expected to finally fall.
Which really brings us to the ultimate question we have to ask ourselves. Are the hidden costs of social media finally coming due? I mean, for well over a decade, we've just accepted these massive digital platforms as free. But this $18 billion framework, this completely unprecedented state-led coalition, and the sweeping architectural changes to how these apps actually function, they all suggest a massive paradigm shift. It forces us to reconsider the true hidden price we've been paying for that frictionless infinite scroll. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, and as always, keep looking at the data.